Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. This is the last video for ERT from 0 to hero. Sorry for the late uploading of this video. And I didn't really want to finish the ERT playlist without this video. So this video is about some tips for the interpretation of resistivity and IP data. So it's generally for electrical data. And I tried to put some points together in a very brief presentation. It's just based on my own experience, but I would love you to add more tips down in the comment section if you know more tips and tricks, so that I also can learn and we also learn together. And a lot of the things that I'm going to discuss will be related to mainly geology, hydrogeology. Okay, let's start. Introduction, data versus information. I already talked about this in one of my videos, I guess, but it's very important to mention this in the last video, which is about data interpretation. And interpretation is actually extracting information from data or from geophysical models, right? The data is whatever, like models, raw data, plots, maps, sections, all of these, they are all data. But information is something that you tell based on your models about reality. So, because I have seen a lot of reports when I was working in the industry that they're just writing, okay, there is a high resistivity anomaly at this part of the profile, which is important. Another low resistivity anomaly and high IP anomalies at the middle of the profile, at 300 meters depth, which is very, very nice and important. So these are not professional, and also they don't pay attention to the fact that various high and low resistivity or IP can be, high IP or low IP, high resistivity or low resistivity, they can be from different features at the subsurface. One of them would be very interesting for your purpose, and the other one would not. So you have to pay attention to this important detail. A better version of the interpretation, an example I just mentioned, would be probably like this. A high resistivity feature is characterized at 300 meters from the beginning of the profile, that it stretches to the north of the profile, to the end of the profile, and its resistivity is more than 200 ohm meters, and this feature has a dip of about 20 degrees towards the north, and is expected to be the response of the sand layer of the Quaternary period. Something like this. Or you can even add more information like the thickness and all of the other details. So provide as much information as possible. Link it to the context of your study. If it's geology, link it to geology. If it's hydrogeology, link it to hydrogeology. If it's environmental assessment, link it to the environmental investigation. But do not overinterpret the data. So don't talk about the things that cannot be extracted and seen in your data. So maintain the balance, I would say. Data and software platforms. So you need to gather complementary information, because you cannot interpret the data based on the geophysical models alone. Why? Because then the models would not be reliable, because in theory, infinite number of models can be fitted to the data, right? So you need complementary information, and that information can be acquired from open source data bases, different type of models, maps, sections, boreholes. Also, you can use the data available from the relevant companies and project collaborators that are usually better types of data, higher in resolution and better in more accurate data. And then you need to use a platform for data visualization and doing some basic analysis. That would be QGIS or ArcGIS. It could be Geosoft for 3D model creations, or it could be Aarhus Workbench if you have access to. It could be Google Earth if that's your needs are very simple. So you can use different types of platforms for visualizing all of your data. But what's important is to have an interface, a software platform that you can visualize all of your data layers, preferably all of your data layers in one platform. Main milestone. So in order to prove, the goal of your project would be like studying the saline water intrusion in a coastal region, right? But the main milestone, it would be understanding the relationship between the biophysiochemical properties of subsurface materials and your geophysical measurement. And in this example that I have mentioned, it would be what kind of properties and what kind of factors basically contribute and control the electrical resistivity variations. For the saline water intrusion case, the effective parameters on resistivity will be geology, because if you have sand, you will have higher resistivity, and if you have clay, you will have lower resistivity. The presence of groundwater or fresh groundwater is also another factor, because above the groundwater level you will have like dry sediments, and below that you will have saturated sediments, so the responses will be different again in terms of resistivity. And the saline water from the sea is also another factor. So the salt water, the presence of salt water is also another factor, because if it is in the medium and in the pore space, then you will have lower electrical resistivity. So by combining all of these, so these are the main biophysiochemical properties for this example that control electrical resistivity. And when you know this information, and when you analyze and realize that these are the main important factors affecting the electrical resistivity, then you will have the capability to interpret your geophysical data or models. So this is the main milestone, and it's not easy. Most of the time it's only one dominant parameter, but sometimes it's two parameters, and sometimes there are two main parameters, sometimes there are even more, and then it becomes a little bit difficult. And if you don't really know, like if you're not sure what is the main thing, you have to assess different possibilities when you're providing your interpretation. And you say, okay, this is the scenario number one. Okay, probably this is the saline water intrusion at this part of the project, at this point of the profile, because of this. Or the scenario number two, it could be the clay layer related to, I don't know, like Pleistocene period, something like this, because of this evidence. But then you have to mention different scenarios, the reasons for mentioning those scenarios and why they are reasonable, and also ranking them. And that's going to be helpful, because if there's any more information, like becomes available, then you can probably neglect one of your scenarios, and one of the scenarios would be just totally rejected, and then you will end up with like one or two scenarios. Then you'll be more sure about what would be the true reason of your data variations. Tip number one: geology is the key. Of course, it's geophysics, right? So geology. You should know the geological environment, if it's igneous province with the presence of igneous rocks, or its sedimentary environment. The materials, the lithologies would be different. the resistivity variations would be different. The age of the geological units, or better saying, I would say, the order of the geological units in your section or in your area would be important. I'll discuss in an example later on. Their general deeper strike would be important. Presence of faults, fractures, faults would be important. Another thing which is actually essential is the scale and dimensions of geological features. So you have a sand layer. Okay, is this sand layer 10 meters in thickness or 100 meters in thickness? So you should be able to answer this question. Tip number 2, check expected geophysical responses. What I mean by this, you have a couple of lithologies in your region. You have to go to the textbooks, you have to go to the articles and find out what would be the reasonable range of resistivity for that specific geology. And then you will see something like the figure I presented here. For example, you will know that igneous rocks are more resistive than clays and tills or mafic rocks. Or you will know that the gravel is more resistive than tills and more resistive than clays. But keep that in mind, that these kind of variations and ranges are what is expected in general conditions, and you should know that some of them are just based on like very specific pure samples measurements in the lab. So if there is another extra factor affecting the resistivity in your study area, that is not considered in these plots, right? So you have to consider that yourself. And the thing is that you have to check the resistivity values in your model and the expected geologies and like the locations. Like I mean, you have like sand in a specific part of your section, then you have some resistivity value. You have to check that value with these reported values, and if it's like different from the expected trends, or if you have a till which is like more resistive than sandstone or shale, more conductive than shale, then you have to think about like, why is that? And then you have to find out the reason for this and why. So if you can figure it out, that's would be very nice. But if it's something that happens in one profile, not in the other one, that would be a problem. Or if sometimes it happens in all of your profiles, so it's something that you're seeing in your area, but you don't know what is the exact reason. So you know that it's true, but you cannot understand the reason. So these are some general things to check, but you have to also make sure that it's possible to have some specific unique trends and like relationships between resistivity of different materials in your own study area. Another very important point is that taking a look at the case studies in the literature is very important and very helpful. And one thing I wanted to mention in this regard is that sometimes they do not report the values as tables or in figures like this. So you have to go to the figures yourself and look at the color scale and see, okay, the sand here is between 150 to 300 ohm meter. Okay, so you get a clue about that specific case study. Specifically, if it's your cases, like your project is about some kind of a geological material that is not commonly reported in the literature, and there's just a few cases studies, you really need to do that trick. Let's go to the tip number 3. Consider these further facts for geology data. So pay attention to the scale of geological map and its inevitable inaccuracies in your study. Sometimes this is mainly relevant to the mineral exploration and prospecting uh, applications of electrical resistivity and IP tomography, because you have a geological map that is not that accurate when compared to the resolution of your ERT or ERT IP. So you have to consider these inaccuracies in the locations of the layer interfaces or faults or any kind of geological feature. And uncertainties due to geological complexity. What do I mean by this is that sometimes the geology is so complicated that the geologist just infer some kind of relationships based on some limited evidences. And he or she is not sure about it, but he or she just needs to just complete the map, right? Because you cannot just leave a specific part of the map like blank. So you put all of your effort and all of the evidences together and your experience to describe what you have seen on the field. But again, sometimes it will be difficult to see what has actually happened. So your geophysical section would probably see some kind of features or structures that was not visible by the at the surface of the ground. So you have to consider this kind of complexities and these like differences between what you see in the geophysical image and what is on the geological map as well, in case of complex geological settings. Something else to mention in this bullet point is that in some cases, for example, like alteration halos or the boundary between two like intrusive rocks, sometimes, or some two sedimentary rocks, something like this, sometimes you have transitional interfaces. So there's no abrupt changes. So in this case, you may see a line drawn on the geological map defining the alteration halos or the specific boundary of geological layers. But because of that transitional thing, it was very hard to define where is actually the most changes happen to consider this as the boundary. So there might be some differences in your geophysical image and the geological map due to this reason as well. And the next thing for tip number 3 is make sure your assumptions are true and consider other possible scenarios. So again, this is actually goes to the fact that if you have some assumptions about the geological setting and your target and your pollution or anything, and you're going forward with that assumption, and if you see something which is different and is not expected in your geophysical image, and you know that your model is true and everything is true and everything is just right, you should probably think about like revising that assumption or just reassessing that assumption. That is that assumption 100% true, or was that kind of uncertain? So this is also important to note. Number 4, the tip number 4 is use satellite imagery. Satellite imagery is very useful. It's so simple to use, but it's very useful, and especially if you have limited information in complementary data, that's super nice and very useful. Uh, especially if you have like outcrops visible, that would be very nice. And sometimes even they are useful in proposing your final suggestions. If you want, like propose a location for drilling a borehole, looking at the satellite imagery would probably um, provide an idea for you that where is easier to go with the drilling machine and take all of the drilling equipment. So maybe you can shift the location of your, like the coordinates of your borehole a little bit and change the azimuth and depth of your suggested borehole, and avoiding a very bad access point. And this is an example about the importance of satellite imagery. So in this case, the blue line shows the ERT IP profile, and we wanted to see the trends of electrical resistivity and induced polarization in a specific volcano sedimentary setting and coupled mineralization. And we wanted to have all of the boreholes on top of our ERT line. And also it was very difficult to follow the perpendicular direction to the strike of the geological formations, because in some parts it was very difficult and impossible to make electrodes connection to the ground. Anyway, we did the blue line, and we didn't have any geological information at that time. So, and we ended up with the resistivity model on the top. And I was thinking in the beginning, okay, what is this low resistivity zone starting from about 30 meter to a 90 meter? And when you compare with the borehole lithologies, it's pretty insane that and in the volcano sedimentary sequence, you expect like kind of horizontal layers. And what happened that you have this kind of trend? And that's because of this spot. When you take a look at satellite imagery, I have pinpointed some yellow and green like arrows to show the displacement, the left strike displacement of the geological unit due to this faulting. And you can also see like the crush zone of this fault to some extent. It's pretty nice. And then you have a very nice explanation for resistivity variations in your model. And another point that I want to discuss here, and I think I have written in the next slide, is that sometimes you need to simplify in order to ease your interpretation. Because, for example, in this case, the sandy limestone and porphyritic andesite units, they have the same electrical responses in terms of resistivity. So you cannot differentiate between these two. So you should consider both of them as one geological layer in your electrical resistivity model so that you can differentiate them from the top limestone unit. So this is another point to mention. Yeah, let's go to the next slide. Tip number 5. Appropriate visualization is crucial. So a picture is worth 1,000 words, right? An important point regarding the color scale is that it might be the range of the parameter would be variable from one profile to the other one. So always pay attention to this fact when interpreting your data. And also, I would suggest using an identical color scale for all of your profiles in a single area. And the last thing I mentioned, like simplifying, sometimes really works. Tip number 6, general steps. So what I would do for interpretations is that I import the ERT line of profile plus the location of electrodes into GIS, all of the other complementary information into GIS, and I would specify the start and end of the geological features, the location of the fault zones on the top of the section. Like, for example, I'll discuss it in the next slide, I guess, visually better. And then finally, when I have all of the data shown on the section, the 2D section or ERT section, then I extrapolate those on the model so that I can gain a picture and regarding the geological information, for example. And at the end, I will double check if that makes sense. If, for example, sand is more resistant than clay, because sometimes you may probably make a mistake in like labeling things. That can happen. This is like very easy and manual but effective way of interpreting the data, I guess. And the visualization thing. So, okay, the picture on the top, for example, shows a resistivity model, and you can see the garden of resistivity. So we have a very low resistivity values up to more than 1,000 ohm meter value resistivities. So what I mean is that, for example, based on the geological map, I know that the start of the QC on my ERT line or profile, the start of the QC unit is about 30 meter, and the end of the QC unit is about 220 meter. So this would be the QC on the top. Then I'll see the resistivity value and say, okay, this is very nice. So this is the QC value. Then from 220 to 260 or 250, this is the share unit or PCKSH. This figure is actually from my paper. You can take a look at my paper. I'll put a link to the description down below if you're interested to read about it. So this is the shale unit. The shale is more conductive or less resistive than the unconsolidated sediments QC. I think it's unconsolidated sediments, some kind of sediment. I don't recall it actually. And then from 230 to the end of the profile, we have the meteorite, which is more highly resistive. And the dipping of the layers are towards the southwest, as you can see in the geophysical image. And what I meant by the order, or which geological layer is younger and which is older, we know that there is another geological layer older than the meteorite, which is the graphite-rich shale, I guess. So I put that here, and so I know that this is probably this unit. There's no outcrop, so you cannot say from the outcrop in the geological map. It's based on other information, you can say this is probably graphite-rich shale. Although in this case, I would like to admit that this could also be an artifact from the inversion. But anyway, this data nicely shows that there is some variations, like from high resistivity to low resistivity on the below. So there might be some inaccuracies in the estimated resistivity, but the trend really shows that there is another layer down below. There is another different layer below the meteorite. And the IP model down below is the same. Just wanted to mention that I have pinpointed different type of details on the model so that I can just ease my interpretation. And based on the information available from these kind of BHZ boreholes, I could provide some more drilling in the area. And I proposed another borehole that was successful. Actually, it got about 12 or 14 meters, I guess, of cover mineralization, sulfide cover mineralization. And actually, we in another profile parallel to this one, we proposed another borehole that was very nice, about 25 meters of mineralization in this style of mineralization. That was pretty significant. So, yeah, if you use all of the complementary information as best as you can, then you can get a lot of information. And note that some of these lines are based on geology and resistivity. So this is just the IP model, but for example, these faults are actually from resistivity and geology, but shown on the IP. Okay. Another visualization. This is just some very preliminary, fast, I would say, interpretations on the acquired data in the field, very like daily reports, and some very general interpretations. Yeah. Again, trying to get as much as information as possible. 2D, 3D. So these are some screenshots from Geosoft, which is a very fantastic software. I really like it personally. And what I did is that I imported the data points with coordinates of three ERT lines, ERT IP lines in the left figure, and you can see that there's a voxel model. They also have a section option to plot, but I haven't tried them on that time. And what's really nice about Geosoft is the design of the borehole things. So you can actually design new boreholes, suggested boreholes, and change the azimuth and dip and depth accordingly, and then you can get the optimum parameter for your design boreholes to achieve your desired anomaly of interest, which is very effective and very nice. This 3D visualization, these are from ArcScene. These are very nice for your reports. On the left, there was an area, and this is the IP models of the area. So it's pretty nice. And if you have satellite imagery and DEM and satellite imagery both, then you can drape the satellite imagery on DEM and show the data. So on the left one, I didn't have the DEM of the area, a good DEM, so I couldn't do that. But on the right one, I had that. So you can see it is a very nice output for your reports. Yeah. And this is an example about like extracting some points and adding them to the map. So I used the export from Rest2D and creating some voxel based in the Geosoft, and finally characterizing the anomalous halos, probably IP anomaly halos that would be important in terms of normalization. Tip number 7. Share your interpretation with another expert. So it's always useful to share your interpretation and your thoughts with different people, different experts, especially if there's a good geologist who knows the area very well. It's highly recommended to have a chat with him or her and get the best idea about the geological condition of the site, because you know the limitations of your geophysical model, and you know where it is accurate, where it's not accurate, and you know like what kind of things you have used getting your model. And then by getting the insight from the geologists, then you can have a better understanding of what can you interpret basically based on your models. And finally, update your interpretations. If there's a new data available, if there's information about a new borehole drilled, if you get something new, if you find a good available, if you find a new layer of data that was useful in the interpretation, revise your interpretation and correct them if necessary. That is the very important point. And thank you and good luck. I hope that this presentation could give you some insights about the interpretation of electrical resistivity and also IP. And share your tricks and tips for interpreting the data if you know something that I haven't covered in the comments section, so we can all learn. Thank you and have a great day.